I have another militia engineer task. Now, I did some reading in TM 5-280 Foreign Mine Warfare Equipment from 1963. In there is a chapter on Soviet landmine warfare doctrine, and it covered very heavily stuff they had done in the 1940s during World War II, or as they refer to it, the Great Patriotic War. In there was a diagram of what they called a roadway minefield pattern. So here's the basic drawing that they had in there, but it didn't have all the information I was looking for. It didn't give enough of the spacings and things like that. So I looked for another report. I came across FSTC 381-T65-470 Manual on the Laying and Clearing of Minefields from 1965. This was a classified translation of a Soviet manual that was written by 3 Red Army engineer officers, and it covered the changing of Soviet landmine doctrine in the 50s to the 60s time frame when this report would have come out. And these 2 officers put in there a lot of information on the types of operations that were done during World War II. So that gave me more of the information to flesh this out. So what I have here, we can call this a Soviet World War II roadway minefield pattern. Now, the intent of this obstacle, looking it over, this has a disrupt intent. It is meant to slow the enemy advance, to allow the retreating forces or falling back forces, because Soviet troops never retreated, they just fell back to better positions. Well, it allowed more times for those troops that were falling back to their secondary positions to get into position and get ready, hopefully giving them enough time to finish out the defenses before the advancing Wehrmacht troops got there. Ideally, you would have partisans or forward observers that would be hidden somewhere within sight of the obstacle, that would be able to call in artillery behind the part of the obstacle they had already cleared to slow those German engineers even further. Now, the start of this complex obstacle here was a minefield that was composed of wooden cased mines. These mines were placed less than a meter apart, so 3/4 of a meter apart, almost mine to mine, going the full width of the road. And then, say, a meter behind it, you had another row of mines, same type, wooden cased mines, also within 3/4 of a meter of each other, going all the way across. Now, in order to decrease the possibility that an enemy tank or motorcycle could drive through here and not set off a mine, these mines would be offset from the ones in the first row, so that you would always have a mine that was in the path of the advancing vehicle. The intent of this particular part of the minefield here was to create a road crater, and they were doing it by use of mines. Now, the particular mines that would be placed in this one would be TMDBs or TMD Bravos, TMD 44s, YAM 5s or YAM 10s, YAM 5s, YAM 10s. All of those were improvised mines that could be made by the troops close to the front lines. In whatever quantity was required, only limitations was materials available. The pre-made fuses, which would come from the factory, also the explosive blocks that would come in, and the availability of suitable lumber in the area to manufacture the mines. These mines were wooden so that they would not be detected by the enemy engineers. This is early in World War II. Let's say this type of obstacle, we're looking at a time frame of 1941 to 1943, early in the war. Mine detection technology is brand new. It was just invented by the British in 1940 because of experiences in North Africa. It's starting to filter through the Allied nations, and at that time the Soviet Union was an Allied nation against Nazi Germany. Germans would have captured examples of those mine detectors and created their own versions, and it took a while for them to get to the front lines. But by the time they did start reaching the front lines, the Soviets were already adapting. So that's why the very first mines were wooden boxed mines. These were extremely hard for the mine detectors to detect. Even though you had a big honking metal fuse inside it, the detectors were just not that sensitive to be able to detect it. So the detection of these mines being there would be when they would go off under the first vehicle going over the top of them. So then we'd end up with a mine crater here going across the roadway. We've now created an even larger obstacle. The next minefield was 100 to 150 meters back from the rear row of this one. This minefield was composed of metallic mines, typically TM35s, TM38s, or TM41s. These were the most common mines during this time period of 41 to 43. This minefield was laid in 3 to 4 rows in a zigzag pattern in order to create a longer minefield. Total depth of this minefield was between 50 to 100 meters. Spacing between the individual mines was 3 meters. Spacing between the closest points on these rows was 3 to 5 meters. They did not want sympathetic detonation of the mines within this particular part of the obstacle. Minimum spacing on the wide part on the zigzag here, minimum was 8 to 10 meters. But ideally, you're probably looking at 10 to 25 meters. Each row went as a diagonal across the road to increase the length of each individual row. And this would go all the way back, zigzagging back and forth. I do have a note on that spacings and orientations changed at random in order to confuse the deminers. So you could have 3 meters between mines, and then say the next mine might be 5 meters away. But you still had the same effect where you would try to overlap these mines here so that if they missed one going through this row, they would still hit the one on the next row. Anti-handling devices were employed, and the percentages I could come across were 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 was the average. The most they would have is 1 anti-handling device attached for every 10 mines. So 1 out of 10 mines would have some type of anti-handling device. But the average, due to availability, especially earlier in the war, was 1 out of every 20. But as the war progressed, you get farther into the war, the Soviets were producing a lot more booby trap fuses that they could employ, so then that number would increase to a 1 in 10. You did not want to put an anti-handling device on every single mine. You want the enemy to spend time trying to remove those mines to decrease the damage to the roadway. That is what that enemy sapper is going to do. He's going to look at this and he's going to figure out, well, can I move this mine to the side, destroy it over there, not in the road, because if we destroy it in the road, it craters the road, and then we got to come up here and fill these holes again in order to continue traffic through here. it was also common that dummy mines would be employed in some of these rows. So you'd have a bunch of live mines in the first row. Second row, you might have a few dummies in here. Maybe in the third row, you would have some dummies, and you would also have some anti-handling devices even connected to the dummy mines. Now, those dummy mines would be mixed in for confusion and to make the field look denser and larger. The dummy mines would be made of a similar material as the mines that were employed. So if it was employed with the wooden mines, it'd be made out of wood. If it was employed with the metallic mines, it'd be made out of metal. You'd have the first few dummy mines would not be booby trapped, because you would want those enemy engineers to come across it and they'd say, hey, this isn't a real mine. Let's not waste the explosive. Let's pull it out of the ground. And then say that third or fourth dummy mine, they're pulling it out of the ground. It's attached to a booby trap underneath. Or it's tied to an anti-personnel mine hidden over here in the side, say a stake mine, something along those lines, maybe an OZM-UVK. So that dummy mine gets pulled out of the ground. The engineer, just looked at it as like, hey, the other dummy mines weren't booby trapped. I'm just going to pull this out, save some time. And then he sets off that booby trap. They've now injured an engineer, and it's going to take even more time because now they have to provide first aid along with continuing the clearance operations. The Soviets are making it more and more complicated for those German engineers to clear this minefield. Now the third minefield in this, according to the books at 150 meters, it'd still be that 100 to 150 meters back further up the road from the previous minefield, and that would be from the rear row to the front row of the next minefield. Minefield number 3 here was also metallic mines, 3 meter spacing, minimum 3 to 5 meters at the closest where the rows come together, minimum 8 to 10 meters on the farthest distance between the rows. You'd have the same situation as up in here. Maybe this one up in here you had some dummy mines not booby trapped. Maybe back here they were booby trapped. Maybe back here you also put in your anti-handling devices. Maybe you didn't put them in up here. Maybe you put them in back here. By this point, if they go through here, no anti-handling devices, they're clearing the mines off the road, setting them aside, destroy them. It takes a long time. They get up here, they're getting tired. Their commanders are yelling at them to get that obstacle cleared. The advance is slowing up. We need to catch up to the retreating forces. So the engineers continue like they did back here. And that's when they start getting injured by the anti-handling devices, by booby traps. It did have a note inside the manual on laying and clearing of minefields that they would place anti-personnel mines on the sides of the roads, and the closest those mines were to the roadway was 3 to 4 meters, 4 meters being the average. And then it would depend on the type of mine that was in place. Was it a pressure mine or was it tripwire activated? The reason you're doing that is you're trying to prevent the enemy sappers from going around the edge of the roadway here, potentially into the tree line if it's in close terrain between trees. You're trying to prevent those sappers from going through there to get an idea as to what is the actual size of this minefield and where the individual rows are. Minefield number 4 here, as you see, it was set 100 to 150 meters back. This was the same as this one. Wooden box mines, TMD Bravos, TMD 44s, YAM 5s, YAM 10s, set 3/4 of a meter apart, a meter between rows, going all the way across the road. to create another road crater. So you have the enemy engineers, they're up here, they're clearing. You know, they go their set distance past the last mine to see if there's any more mines as they're clearing with the mine detectors. They don't detect anything, they mount up, they start moving forward. If the enemy commander is a lot more cautious, he tells those engineers, just continue forward, do your scans, not as deliberate, do it quicker. They're moving forward. They may walk past this mine field here because it's wooden case mines, and they don't know that they walked through another minefield until that following vehicle went up. Have I seen an obstacle like this? Yes, I have. Not in real life. It was in training. This was a tactic that they tried to copy at the Joint Readiness Training Center before 9/11. I don't know if they continued the tactic after that because I didn't go there after 9/11. But definitely in the 1990s, we did come across this. We would come across, especially this, the zigzag on those back roads where the trees were right up next to the roadway. It's hard to get through. We're not going to be able to bypass, you know, you can't push a freaking M1 through swampy ground on the side of the road. We didn't want to try pushing even Bradleys or 113s through it because they'll sink. We have to go down that roadway. So then you would see minefields like this that were typically 2 or 3 rows of mines in a row. Soviet tactics, from what I came across here, it was supposed to be 3 to 4. Training environment, abbreviated it, cut down on time, but still the same effect. It takes a long time to clear a minefield using a mine detector because every single detection you have to check out. You have to make sure it's not a mine. So you would have the sapper come forward with his mine detector. He gets the detection. He marks it. He pulls back. His prober swaps out with him, comes forward. He has to probe in the roadway. First thing he does when he gets up there, he looks for indicators. Does he see any irregular or regular lines in the road? Not irregular. He's looking for straight lines. He's looking for curved lines. That type of stuff, which would be an indication that, hey, there's a mine here, the soil settled, or it just plain wasn't covered properly. He finds that. He then goes through, uncovers that shape, and there's probably a mine underneath. If he doesn't see anything, he then has to probe or essentially sweep the area. It depends on how compact the ground is. You don't know how long those mines could have been there. They may not have been laid the night before, could have been laid a few days before. And there could have been rain that came through, which would hard pack that gravel, that sand in the roadway. So he then goes through, has to probe past the detection point. Usually clears a box that's, say, 2 feet by 2 feet or 2 feet wide by, say, 3 feet in depth. You don't want to waste too much time, but you're going through and you're probing. If you detect something, you clear it off and, hey, I got a mine here. And then it's dealt with. It's either pulled from the roadway if you don't want to damage a road, or it's marked with something showing that, hey, there is a mine here. It could be a marker flag. You could put down a rock, something to show you that, hey, we need to put an explosive charge here. I think once we even did chem lights. Just kept them in the package, slit them. We found a mine. You laid it in front of the mine with that slit of the light going back towards your people, and that told them that, hey, when we have to blow the charges, there's a mine here, there's a mine here, there's a mine here. But it takes a lot of time. You keep going, sweeping through there, mine by mine by mine. An obstacle like this, in this type of depth, we're looking at, I'll say 50 meters here, 50 meters here. We're looking at maybe about 500 meters in depth total 450 to 500 meters in depth. That deep of a minefield, when you're hand clearing like that, you're looking at probably at least 2 to 3 hours. You may say that's a lot, but if you're out there with a mine detector scanning, it takes a long time, especially during World War II with the older mine detection technology. Wasn't as sensitive. Now, I'm sure someone is saying right now, well, security guys, they've gotten past this. They have Huskies now. Yeah, they have Huskies now, which are an evolution of the South African meerkat from the 1970s. But in the 1940s, the only way to find mines back then was mine probe or the use of a really crude mine detector. And even today, the battle drills for clearing something like this, it's still going to be a pain in the ass. Now let's fast forward to current day. Something like this is employed. Let's say in Ukraine. All right, we're pushing forward a Husky. That Husky doesn't tell you the exact position of the mine. It just detects, hey, there's metal here. So once that Husky makes that detection, he has to pull back, and then the sappers come forward with those handheld mine detectors and has to locate each individual mine in that location. Once they clear that minefield, they're past that distance pass, and I think ours was, it was between 10 to 25 meters past the rearmost mine is where we stopped detecting. At that point, we got this cleared. Then they would send the Husky forward again till it made another detection. And remember, modern vehicles like a Husky, it cannot tell the difference between bits of shrapnel on the ground or a soda can put in the ground or a soup can put in the ground or just the lid is buried in the ground and an anti-tank mine. All it is detecting is that magnetic detection, and you do not know where it is over the entire width of the search head on the sides of the Husky. Something like this type of minefield pattern, still viable today, still can be done. Now, in Manual on the Laying and Clearing of Minefields, they did change these. World War II, you had them fairly compact. By the 1960s, the Soviet tactic changed. You had a row of mines, and it didn't have to be straight across, it didn't have to be diagonal. It could be a lazy W going across the road. The next batch of mines behind that was 25 to 50 meters. And then the same thing. Could be a straight line, could be diagonal, could be a lazy W. Then the next row behind that one, 25 to 50 meters. Same thing, single row going across, either straight across because they're, have a bit of a time crunch, or lazy W. Lazy W goes one direction, then changes, another direction, changes, another direction. Like the German reports on that, this type of minefield stated that this was written on, spacings and orientations change at random to confuse the deminers. And nowadays, you could still come across wooden mines, but you're more likely to come across non-metallics. Examples, the TM62 Papa 3, the German DM11, which was a Cold War mine. The mine it's based off, the French M1951. It could be an American M19, which is a plastic case mine. Something along those lines that would not be detected, and your Husky or that minesweep team may not come across. So we have an obstacle in depth here meant to slow the enemy long enough to allow the retreating forces, or excuse me, the falling back forces to reach their next defensive line and get prepared and get rested before the enemy advance makes it past the obstacle and to that next line. I do recommend people go through, especially if you're an engineer, read those manuals from during the Cold War, like TM5-280 Foreign Mine Warfare Equipment. Read through on those old style tactics. They are being pulled out of the libraries, dusted off, and employed now. I have come across a couple reports, one that I read from the Op 4, one from the U.S. Army Engineer Center about the fighting in Ukraine. And the newer people who are still in as the analysts, who are younger than me, cannot understand how the Russians changed their tactics. They're not doing it the way that our current manual says they're supposed to do it. Well, reading the older manuals from the Cold War, I can tell you what the Russians are currently doing in Ukraine. They are going back to those manuals from early in the Cold War, back to World War II. They're rereading them, they are updating them, and employing those tactics on the battlefield now. And our current analysts are stuck with, well, that's boomer information. They don't use that stuff anymore. Well, guess what? They are, and these analysts are getting completely confused because they don't understand that. So look up those older manuals. You're going to find a lot of good information in there on minefield patterns, the intents. Go through. You'll learn a lot. I'm going through now, and I'm actually deliberately going in a lot of those manuals and reading those sections, and I'm learning stuff I didn't even know. So there you go. Soviet World War II roadway minefield pattern. Now, for all my engineer brothers and Patriot militia movements, always remember, essayons.